I am Daniel Lucas and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book Digital Overwhelm, no other than Mr. Craig Mattson. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Craig, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
I'd be so pleased to. Thank you, Daniel, for making space in your show. I'm glad to talk with you. I think of myself as a teacher and a researcher, which means that I am both someone who's trying to figure things out for myself as a perpetual student, but I'm also always trying to help undergraduate and graduate students figure things out as well. And one of the areas that I've spent a lot of time researching and teaching about has to do with organizational communication, which is often where we feel digital overwhelm.
Certainly. Mr. Craig Mattson, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. So what factors contribute in the sense of being flooded and pointless in a modern work environment?
What factors?
Yes.
So many factors. I spent 2022 talking with a group of interviewees that I called quarter lifers.
Yes.
I didn't come up with that term, but that refers to people from the age of roughly 20 to 40. And I asked them how they were coping with work culture in that time. And yeah, I heard lots of factors, Daniel. I heard about relational factors, trying to get along with the supervisor, trying to get along with coworkers. I heard about personal and domestic factors, like trying to, run a business out of your home while your kids are small and running around. I also heard quite a lot about technological factors, and that's why I wrote this book, Digital Overwhelm. I was trying to explore the ways that rapid technological development intersects with some really big human feelings, and I named that Digital Overwhelm.
Certainly. So, how does rapid technological development impact a mid-career professionals differently and early career individuals?
Well, mid-career is a little bit of a loose term. I use that as a way to try to be more inclusive. But generally speaking, we're talking about the sort of millennial and maybe some of the younger Gen X demographics. Early career would be more like, Gen Z, just getting out of college, or, in their late 20s even. But your question is, how do they experience technological development differently? It is pretty different. So people in the young Gen X and elder millennial category very much remember life before the smartphone. They remember life before digital spaces were so prevalent for us. Gen Z would be much more native to it. They would feel in some ways it's always been the weather in their lives. So it is interesting, as I've been interviewing Gen Z folks more recently, to hear that there's a kind of movement towards the analog and the sort of do it yourself, do it by hand, low tech sort of interest. Whereas some of the older folks sometimes have a hard time getting off their phones. So there are interesting sort of back and forth movements here. But I think the larger point is we all feel like technological development is moving super fast. We just tend to respond to it in different ways.
Certainly. So, what are the common signs and symptoms of digital overwhelm in the workplace?
Well, I think one of the most familiar signs is an inability to focus on a single task. There's a kind of bumblebee approach to work where you're kind of flitting from task to task and never rarely bringing something to conclusion. Even more importantly, you're rarely able to kind of sink down deep into a task and do what Cal Newport has referred to as deep work, where you have this kind of sustained focus. I was talking with somebody the other day who described his experience during COVID the pandemic, and he was saying like he did a lot more reading than he was used to doing. He just had more time for that, and he said my brain felt better. And I think sometimes the digital overwhelm that we feel in the workplace makes our brains hurt. I think it also registers as sometimes not only a kind of distractedness, but it could also be a sort of animation and excitement. Like it can feel good, like drinking caffeine feels good to, engage in new technology and see its new capabilities. So I don't mean to be totally down on this experience in the workplace. Sometimes it's sort of energizing, like drinking a strong cup of coffee. But there's usually the, we have to come down from that at a certain point. And that's when things get more difficult. So those are a couple of symptoms of digital overwhelm.
Very well said, Mr. Craig. Very well articulated. So, how has the post-pandemic work landscape intensified feelings of digital overwhelm?
Yeah, that's a good question, Daniel. So I'm getting a little bit out of my lane here because my research was very much centered in 2022. And I have continued to interview people on my podcast, which isn't really formally, qualitative research or anything. But what am I noticing as I'm just trying to pay attention to the workplace? I think that digital overwhelm surfaces for us today in the workplace in the sense that we have so many different modalities of work. And it's hard to get consensus on what is the appropriate modality. So we have, the return to office mandates, which I think is a kind of response to the, digital overwhelm in a sense that the managers are like, I want to be in person with you. And then we have hybrid arrangements, and, hybrid arrangements break down into different kinds of subcategories of modalities as well. So I think just the sheer proliferation of the ways that we're doing work today is one expression that is digitally overwhelming. And I'll just say one more thing. I was just reading this morning in a book by Oliver Burkeman that work tends to seep into all the nooks and crannies of our lives today because it is so accessible, and it's so easy to sort of pick up a task for a moment and work on it on your phone or on your laptop. Just sort of open that even late at night. You might be, oh, I forgot to send that report, or, oh, I should, tie down that list, or I could send 2 more emails here. And that, I think, feels in the moment productive, but it can be really exhausting as that sense of like work's pervasiveness accumulates for us. So those are some observations, a little bit unlicensed and uncertified, but some general observations about work life and digital overwhelm today.
So, Mr. Craig, let's talk about strategies for coping. What practical frameworks does your purpose for managing digital overwhelm?
Well, the first thing I think I try to say and try to remind myself, Daniel, is that you can't manage it. Like, it's not something you can control and master. It's not something you can finesse. So
Yes.
I think humbly saying it's too much. It's just excessive. I think that's an important first step. Embrace that overwhelm. Just freely, humbly, candidly admit it. It's too much. You're never going to get complete control of it. The development of artificial intelligence is making us hyper aware of how quickly things are developing. So I think that's the first thing to say in trying to manage your overwhelm is you can't, exactly. But I think once you embrace that, then new kinds of actions become possible. Once you take that sort of posture of humility and curiosity towards our conditions today, I think some choices become possible. So my tendency is to say, and this is what I say in this book, that we tend to get stuck in a particular mode of communication with coworkers. We just have our own preferred mode. We have a way we like to communicate with people, and then we just sort of stay with that. And so my book recommends a framework that I call mode switching. And I talk through 6 different modes of communication that all respond to digital overwhelm in different ways. Some have some strengths, and then others have other strengths, but they can all have their blind spots as well. So I
Cer-
recommend mode switching among the 6 modes of communication discussed in the book. What's that make you think of, Daniel?
Certainly agreeable, Mr. Greg, and thank you so much for sharing your empowering knowledge to the world. So, how can mid career professionals develop sea legs to navigate complex, digitally meditated workplaces?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like the image of sea legs. I tried to play with that metaphor in the book itself because so much of our ways of talking about digital media today do use water imagery, like a tsunami of
Mm.
technological development, or ocean waves, or the tide, or currents, or streaming television, or whatever. So yeah, I like the image of sea legs, um, because I think it also implies a sort of mature response to overwhelming conditions. Like, you know how to kind of keep upright even though you can't control the conditions. So yeah, your question was, how can we do that today? Am I understanding the question correctly?
Yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm. I just mentioned one framework that my book sort of works through, like different switching among different modes. For example, I'll give you a concrete example. Let's say that you're a sort of less is more communicator. So you might prefer texting as your way of engaging people, or maybe DMs on Teams or some other platform like that. You like to use brief, concise, pointed, blunt communications. And that has real strength and efficiency and quickness, and maybe sometimes it limits misunderstanding because it's just so direct. But on the other hand, some of your coworkers might experience that communication as too blunt or too sparse, and they might be inclined towards a big, fat, long email, and that's their preferred way of communicating. And so, still other people might say, we never really come to understand each other until we speak face to face. So all these modes are good and valid, but learning to be communicationally flexible and to move among the 6 different modes I discussed in the book, I think is really the wisdom that we need for the workplace today.
Certainly. So, what techniques can be employed to craft authentic and efficient digital communications?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I've played with is to say that when you put out a digital piece of communication, like an email or a text, or even if you engage in a video space like you and I are doing right now, um, try to bring with you into that communication the values of speech communication. So the values you practice when you voice a message to someone else. So for instance, sometimes people can be a little tone deaf in their digital communications. They're kind of forgetting their voice in their communications. And so in my chapter on email, I explore the ways that we could alter the volume of our email, like its force, its amplitude, or we might change the pitch of the email, or we might alter its quality. All these are vocal terms, And I don't mean them literally, I just mean them figuratively speaking. But they offer us a way to think about our digital communication that I think is a little bit more humane and is a pretty reliable guide. It doesn't always work, but it's a pretty reliable guide. If you're trying to think, how is this text going to come across? Try saying it aloud and see how it sounds. Very often, that's a
Yes.
good, simple way to stay human in digital spaces.
Certainly, very well said, Mr. Craig. Very well said. So, what would be your advice for those people out there that thinking, "Oh, my goodness, I'm too much overwhelmed about digital."
Well, I'm with you. That's the first thing I should say. I wrote this book because I feel it too. And I wasn't done with it when I had finished the book either. I mean, it takes a while to write a book, but I still was digitally overwhelmed when I was done. So I don't think it's, easy to eliminate. I think we have to be kind to one another, be patient with one another. I feel this sometimes in meetings. Some days I am just not able to resist the temptation to check various notifications or did that person respond to the email, or how is my podcast rating going, or whatever. And I'm
True.
embarrassed about that and ashamed
Yes.
about that. And I'm grateful for my colleagues when they're patient with me. When I'm working with students, I really try not to give very strict rules about, the use of digital devices in the classroom. I try instead to offer invitations. Like, I try to cultivate in the students, I try to invite them, let's say, into a space of mindfulness. Like, what's going on with you right now, technologically, digitally? How's it going today? How distracted are you? How
Yes.
much are you succumbing to what's going on? And just sort of raising awareness for that, helping students to pay attention to their digital contexts. I think that's good advice for all of us. And I think it's a more gracious way to deal with digital overwhelm.
Fair enough. And thank you for your advice, Mr. Greg. What would be your short term and long term goals in writing as well as podcasting?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, thank you for asking about that. I appreciate the format of your podcast, so I want to
Thank
say
you.
that. I like the book review idea. I think it's very smart, and I'm grateful for it as as an author. Short-term goals, yeah, I think it's hard in the podcast world to build an audience, right? There are so many podcasts today. I work
Out
on a
there.
team of intergenerational podcasts. Well, there's about 5 of us on the team. Kind of goes up and down, 1 or 2 each week, depending who's available. But I would love to build a larger listenership, kind of connect with more people through the podcast. I feel like there's a good conversation going on about work culture. It's called the Mode Switch Pod. And I'd love to, connect my team with people who are really trying to figure out what's going on in my organization and in my job today. Something strange here. What's up? And I think conversations like this can help. Long-term goals, I'm working on another book. It sort of arises out of this book. And I think it also addresses not just work culture, but our posture towards work itself, toil, labor, and how we can, in a way, sort of find a better posture towards work. So that's something I'm working on in the long term.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. Craig, and you are most
Thank you,
welcome to
Daniel.
come back on Book 101 Review and let's talk about your new book. For sure, it's empowering book. So let's talk about integrating ancient wisdom. In what ways that you drawn upon ancient wisdom, particularly from Hebrew scriptures, to address modern
Mm-hmm.
work challenges?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that must sound strange to draw on very, very old books like the Book of Job or the Book of Ecclesiastes or something like that to talk about, Zoom fatigue. That sounds just odd, right? But I have found that drawing on older books like the Hebrew scriptures, which are very important to my personal faith, um, can be a sort of resource for people who don't even share my faith, who have a different religious orientation or no religious orientation. Because these are deeply human stories. They're deeply human pieces of poetry. And because they're so old and because you know, they've been in so many conversations over the millennia, I find it's useful to go back and, renew my own kind of claustrophobic, perspective, open myself up to an older and maybe bigger perspective than I might have otherwise. Sometimes it feels, when I look at one of these, when I read, say, something like the Book of Job, it sometimes feels like I'm seeing the horizon. You know how, like, you're walking down a suburban street or something, and you see trees and houses, and then maybe you get to the end of the street and there's a park, and all of a sudden you can see where the sky meets the earth, and you just have this sort of bigger sense of the world, right? And I
Yes,
think that's sort of the experience I get when I read an ancient text like the Book of Ecclesiastes.
certainly. Totally agree with you. Classic principles are one of a kind. You will
Mm,
learn from them.
mm,
And for sure, like relativity, until now, we're still using it by
mm.
Einstein, right? It's still the same, just like the principle of Job. It's still the same, but
Mm,
it
mm,
just evolved through generations to
mhm,
generations,
mm,
different interpretation. So,
mhm,
Mr. Craig, what lessons from biblical wisdom literature are most relevant to today's
mhm.
professionals?
Well, I- I'll say really quickly that the Book of Job is about a man who is in deep suffering. He's
Yes.
lost his family, he's lost his wealth, he's lost his dignity, and these three friends come to talk with him, and they are very small-minded friends, unfortunately. And they are convinced that he must have done something wrong, that all these terrible things have happened to him. And Job basically defends himself and says, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't think, I mean, I'm not perfect, but I didn't deserve this. And finally, at the end of the book, after he has an encounter with the divine, with a voice from the whirlwind, as it says, um, then he gives up on his project in trying to defend himself, and he says, I'm going to stop that, and I'm just going to return to my community." And he does so, and in the beginning of the book, he's a very wealthy man who is is like a philanthropic sort of figure in his community. But at the end of
Yes.
the book, he is a recipient. He receives gifts from his community. And so I like the way the book is sort of like a give and take kind of understanding of community. There's reciprocity, there's giving and exchanging, receiving and exchanging. And so I think as we're in digital spaces today, as often as we can, it's a good idea to remember that our communications that we receive and the communications that we give are potentially uh, gifts, life giving gifts. So I don't think we can do that all the time, but as often as you
Sure.
can, try to give and receive your communication as a gift.
Yes, I like when God tested Job, his faith. It's
Mm,
something else.
mm,
Learn
mm,
from that. Have faith in everything you do. So,
mm.
Mr. Craig, how does integrating timeless wisdom enhance resilience against digital stressors?
Hmm. Well, I think one of the things I learned by, spending time with people like Job and the teacher in the Book of Ecclesiastes, the philosopher there, is
Yes.
you realize humans have always been overwhelmed by something. That's just the human condition. And so I think in a way that builds resilience. It enables you to say, okay, in a certain sense, like, there's nothing like deeply unusually wrong about my life if I feel overwhelmed. that is how it goes, being a person. And so I think that's one thing that helps to build resilience in reading some of these older texts.
Certainly. So, to wrap up our discussion, Mr. Greg, what practical steps can individuals take to incorporate these ancient insights into their
Hmm.
work lives?
hmm Well, one thing you can do, this is going to sound a little self-interested, but one thing you can do is read my book. So my book discusses like I said, 6 modes of communication. I discuss their strengths and weaknesses in the workplace. But every chapter is followed up with what I call a mode switch workshop, and it's like a half chapter. And in those chapters, I offer practical approaches to email, to what we're doing right now. More and more people are podcasting. So I have a half chapter called How to Make a Podcast, but
Yes.
also what to do when your technology breaks down and how to avoid exhaustion in the Zoom room when you just have wall to wall, screen to screen meetings all day. How do you cope with that? And so I offer practical ways of dealing with Zoom exhaustion. Um, and then the book concludes with a discussion of advocacy, persuasive communication in digital spaces. And I talk about practical ways to practice that sort of persuasive communication. So, yeah, I guess that's my recommendation. Check out those half chapters in my book, Digital Overwhelm, and they'll offer you plenty of practical ways to sort of connect ancient wisdom with contemporary conditions.
Mr. Craig Mattson, thank you so much for sharing your book to the world. And we are looking forward for more empowering books like this. So can you please invite our listeners to support your book?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that, Daniel. My encouragement would be to check out my website at themodeswitch.com, and you'll see my books there. You can also find Digital Overwhelm on Amazon or on other online bookstores. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome, and please do plug in your podcast.
Yes, the Mode Switch pod is available on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, and it's distributed on my Substack newsletter. So that's called The Mode Switch with Craig Mattson.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Craig Mattson, because if you support him, more empowering books to come, more empowering episodes to come. So, Mr. Craig, thank you so much for your time.
This has been a gift, Daniel. Thank you.
More to come, people. See you soon.